Um, these issues or questions could only be addressed by addressing historic land and agrarian imbalances, right? When the leaders in Bandung met, they were talking about the need for self-determination, end to colonialism and sovereignty. And this cannot happen as long as the reclamation of land has not taken place. Because through colonization, people, indigenous populations, they were displaced from their land, right? So not only people were they dispossessed, but also colonialism undermined local industrial development in the global south through what Bruno yesterday described as the international division of labor, right? We continue to be producers of primary commodities that will be exported to Europe mainly. If we look at the economy of Sri Lanka today, like any economy in Africa, you find that we rely much more on exporting primary commodities that were introduced under colonialism: tea, coffee, rubber, right? So we are dependent economies. So the spirit of Bandung was supposed to bring this to an end, right? Was supposed to bring this to an end. Initially, I said by the reclamation of land, and secondly, by also what my colleagues, previous speakers like Ndongo, identified as delinking, right? Delinking also means building your own industrial base, right? So, I mean, even there were various forms of colonialism, right? In the whole of global south, Latin America, Asia, and Africa. And if we look at Africa, Sami Amin actually came to develop 3 macro regions, right, to describe the nature of colonialism. There was the Africa of the colonial trade or peasant economy, mainly found in West Africa. I'm sure this also can relate in some parts of Asia and Latin America. In this part of the continent, the peasantry was left intact, right? The peasants were not displaced from their land, but their nature of crops which they grew, they were changed by the colonial system to suit colonialism, right? That's Africa of the colonial trade. Then we have Africa of the concessional companies, found mainly in Central Africa, DRC, and other countries where plantations were established, right? And I'm sure if you look again here in Asia, you will still see the same. Then there was the third category which he identifies, I mean is the Africa of the labor reserves, or the former secular economies, where there was massive land alienations or displacements, where people were removed from their lands. Countries like South Africa, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Kenya, just to name a few. So here there was massive land alienation. So at independence, in most of our countries, we see that there was no structural change, right? There was no structural change. The land questions, they were not addressed. And also, we continue to be suppliers or producers of raw products, right? And yet this was a moment when the Bandung principles were supposed to lead to economic development. But suddenly we see structural adjustment programs, right, being introduced in many countries, not only in Africa, but also Asia and Latin America, right? And by structural adjustment programs, it led to the abandonment of state planning. State planning introduced new tenure systems, right? That is the promotion of land titling, right? Promotion of freehold tenure. And more broadly, structural adjustment programs opened our economies. They became more vulnerable, right? So under structural adjustment program, we see the perpetuation of land concentration, right, from foreign entities from the West. They come in to buy land, displacing locals. That is happening. So under structural adjustment, we see the perpetuation of what I can say, neocolonialism, colonial domination in some other ways. So we see it in the land sector. We see it in the sector, and we see the lives of peasants worsening during this period. There's withdrawal of state support. We see peasants in Africa today being displaced by foreign entities, right? Working with the local state, right? So the neoliberal period sees the perpetuation of inequalities, right? Which is primitive accumulation. And for others for other scholars in the Agrarian South, which is a journal actually founded by scholars from the Africa, Asia, and Latin America, they point out that we still have problems in the global South, which they say is the agrarian question. And for them, the agrarian question is a question of wrestling, taking away, or fighting for global agriculture, right? Agrarian question today is a question of fighting for global agriculture, land, and other natural resources from the predatory logic of monopoly finance capital and of submitting them to the logic of autonomous, egalitarian, democratic, industrial, and sustainable development for the benefit of all peoples of the world. So here they identify that under neoliberalism, we now see the dominance of monopoly capital, which is now continuing with the logic of appropriating natural resources, land, and even industries from the people of the South. Hence, we see many problems today. We see people fighting for their land rights everywhere today. We see people not being in employment, right? And we see also commodities being exported at a cheap price. So the major task is to fight for the natural resources so that all of us can benefit. So we see that the neoliberal economic policies or structural adjustment programs made us to deviate from the Bandung spirit. And that is imperialism at work. That is what Kwame Nkrumah he had warned us before that this would happen. So for these scholars, neoliberalism did not end the agrarian question, as claimed by some, but it relaunched the agrarian question of monopoly finance capital. That is, monopoly finance capital has now come to be too powerful, more than anything else, right? Leading to the pauperization of the majority of the people. Hence, majority of people, poverty today has been escalating in the global south. We are now much more reliant on food imports. Yeah? We are no longer producing our own food. We are now more reliant on food imports. And during this period, countries that attempt to implement land reforms, they are met with punitive measures. They are sanctioned. For example, we have the case of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe undertakes a radical land reform in 2000, and as a result of that, it is isolated, it is sanctioned, the economy is not performing well today. And we have the current case of South Africa. We know that the South African president was summoned to the US, and we know that the reasons basically is not genocide, but is the issue of land. There is fear that if South Africa might undertake a land reform. So the idea here is to strike fear into the South African government and its people so that they don't undertake or implement a radical land reform. So these are some of the effects of neoliberalism, structural adjustment program under neo-colonialism. What's the way forward? What's the way forward now? I have been trying to articulate the challenges since colonialism to the post-independence phase, looking at the land and agrarian sector. What's the way forward? And for Sam Moyo and Paris Heroes, they argue that to we cannot address the national question without addressing the agrarian question, land and agrarian question. So the most important thing is to address the agrarian questions. How? Implement land reform, so that we address inequalities where they exist. Protect the land rights of vulnerable groups, women, peasants. How do we achieve that? By reforming land tenure, by implementing land tenure reforms, right? We also need to see the state coming in and supporting farmers in the global south. The retreat of the state in the 80s and 90s has caused untold suffering on the peasant. So we need to see the state coming back with various forms of support. It could be price support systems, subsidies, all those kind of things. Promotion of cooperatives, that is important. And public sector and private sector partnerships, they are also must also be experimented with and tried. But in doing all this, in undertaking all these initiatives, there is need to depart from neoliberalism, right, towards embracing other alternatives, and it could be socialism or any other alternatives, right? We need to revisit those. We need to revisit Pan-Africanism as a guiding ideology, guiding framework. The Bandung spirit has to be revisited again. For Africa, we'll need to go back to the Lagos Plan of Action, which we think was quite useful and had a good vision for the content. The Lagos Plan of Action of 1980. So it's a shift. We need a shift from neoliberal economic order, right, towards embracing other alternatives. We also need to see resistance, right? Resistance from below. Farmers challenging corporate control over their agriculture. We need to see resistance, defending their land rights from below. That has to happen. And lastly, when we talk of Pan-Africanism and the Bandung, it must not end at the state level, but it must, the principles of Bandung and Pan-Africanism must go down to the community level, to the people, right? It must end at community level. Because we have to do away with discriminatory practices that are found at the local level based on race, ethnicity, caste, all those kind of things. That's what I mean when you say the principles of Bandung. Those are principles of equality, remember, self-determination. So equality must not be amongst states alone, but equality must be promoted even at a lower level. Lastly, solidarity remains key. Thank you.